Imagine taking a ride on the magic school bus into somebody's digestive system. Likely you would see a place covered in mucus. Acid and enzymes would pour out over top of you as objects are smashed up, broken down, and propelled forward. Proteins, fats, sugars, and ions would be actively absorbed and taken away into the blood. In certain places, bicarbonate would ooze from the walls to help enzyme function. It would seem chaotic and messy, but it's actually very efficient. Today I'm going to be talking about the digestive system, which will give you a better understanding of how IBD is affecting your body. Alright guys, so let's take a closer look at the gastrointestinal tract. It's essentially just a long convoluted tube that goes all the way from your mouth down through your body to your anus. It has four main functions. Those are digestion, absorption, motility, and secretion. Okay, we're going to look at how each part of your tract does that. It's made up of all these different parts. So if you look over here, we see the food's going to start in your mouth. Obviously, you're going to chew it up. It's going to go down your esophagus, get into your stomach. A little bit of digestion is going to happen there, breaking the food down, and then it's going to end up in your small intestine, and then last, it's going to end up in your large intestine. Okay, so if we take a closer look at the mouth, esophagus, and stomach, there's kind of a couple main ideas here. You're going to get some mechanical digestion, meaning like with your teeth when you're chewing, you're going to be breaking the food down. But then also you're going to get part chemical digestion, and that's going to come from the enzymes in the saliva. Once it gets down into your stomach, there's going to be acid. It's going to start breaking it down. And the main idea as it regards to inflammatory bowel disease is that Crohn's can affect this area, but ulcerative colitis cannot. Okay, it's restricted to your large intestine. And then if we look over here, this is just an endoscopy of the esophagus. A lot of you guys, if you're in the process of getting a diagnosis, or if you've just been diagnosed, you've probably had an endoscopy. They probably did that as one of the diagnostic tools. This one over here looks to be very healthy. Looks nice and pink. But we're gonna move from the stomach and we're gonna head over to the small intestine. And this is an area where people get confused why it's called the small intestine. The reason is just because the diameter of the small intestine is smaller than the diameter of the large intestine. If you looked at it as a whole, it's actually much, much longer than the large intestine, but like I said, the diameter is smaller, and that's why we call it that. So if we pulled it out and looked at it as a straight tube, the first part of it would be called the duodenum, the middle part would be called the jejunum, and the last part would be called the ileum. And this tube actually has multiple layers to it. If we look in this diagram right here, we see it's got this outer layer. Imagine this is the inner part of the tube, and it's got this outer layer and then another layer in here, and then this layer that looks like it's probably muscle. We're going to talk about that a little more. And what's interesting about it is that it is all built to increase surface area. And the more surface area you have, the more you can absorb. And that's the whole point of the small intestine. This is where you're going to be doing all the absorption of all the nutrients of the food you eat. And it does this. If you look, you see these little finger-like projections here. Those are called villi. And if we look at it under a microscope over here, you can see they all stick out like this. And when you fold it up and make it stick out like that, it really increases the surface area. And if we look over here, that is actually an x-ray of my stomach and small intestine. They did a procedure that's called a small bowel follow-through. And basically what you do is you drink this liquid, and it goes through your stomach and your small intestine, and they take x-rays all along the way as it's moving through. And they do this to try and rule out Crohn's disease, because if there is active Crohn's disease, you would expect to see some lesions here within the small intestine, some skip lesions. And we're going to talk more about that in future videos, but for now, let's get back to this idea of the different layers of your small intestine. So here on this, as you see, it's the tube. On this inside of the tube, this is what's called mucosa. If you ever hear your GI doctor talking about how your mucosa is being affected, that's all he's talking about, is that very innermost layer. And then just right underneath it, you're going to have submucosa, and under that you're going to have muscles. And the muscles are important because they're going to be the ones that are contracting and pushing food along the tube and all that. And then on the outside you have the serosa. So the main things that we're going to worry about with inflammatory bowel disease are going to be the mucosa and the submucosa. And whether you have ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease, different layers can be affected. So that is going to be important moving forward. But if we get back to our journey through the gastrointestinal tract, we're going to arrive at the end of the small intestine, which is called the ileum, and we are going to get to the beginning of the large intestine, which is right there, and it's called the cecum. And this is going to be on the right side of your body here. So as food moves through, it is going to enter the cecum right here, and it is going to go up the right side of your body, and then it is going to go across, and then down, and then finally it's going to exit the body. And some of the important points I wanted to make about the large intestine, like we said earlier, the reason why it's called that is just simply because of the diameter. It's actually much shorter than the small intestine. But the large intestine is the colon, and some people don't realize that those are just two names for the same thing. So when you have a colonoscopy, that's what we're talking about, the large intestine. So they'll stick the camera up here, and they'll bring it all the way around, and then they'll pull it out and look at all of the mucosa in here to make sure everything's looking okay. And the main function of the large intestine is just primarily to reabsorb water and ions, some vitamins, and also prepare the stool to exit the body. So it's going to be secreting a lot of mucus to push that stool through. So you can imagine if you have a condition like ulcerative colitis where there's inflammation and there's trouble absorbing water and trouble secreting mucus, you can see why you would have diarrhea, and also why you would have bloody diarrhea. You can see, if we look at this picture right here of a colonoscopy, you can see how pink the tissue is, and that's because there's so many blood vessels there. And what's really interesting is you can actually live without a large intestine. In fact, that's how I live. So it's actually not a vital organ. So if you have malfunctions in your large intestine, you can actually just cut it out. But that takes us to the end of the journey through the GI tract. And if we look back on some of the main ideas from the video, we saw that its primary function is going to be the mechanical and chemical digestion. And it's really built to increase surface area, which is going to help you absorb all your nutrients. And also the cells are going to be secreting mucus, which is going to help the stool pass through. There are different layers that can be affected by different diseases, depending on whether you have Crohn's or ulcerative colitis. And malfunctions in the small intestine might appear to be a bit more important or devastating than with the large intestine, because you can actually live without your large intestine. So here are a list of some of my upcoming videos that I'm working on. We're going to talk about IBD pathology and some of the differences between Crohn's and colitis now that you have a better background understanding of your digestive system. And then you can see here we're going to get into some more interesting things. So stay tuned. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time.